Welcome, everyone. I would say Alafia Habaragani during Kwanzaa. When this series starts, it will be next week, and we will be approaching Amani Day, which is a day of faith. I welcome you to join me with the launching of our YouTube series on Africa-centered ancestral healing, which will be a 7-part series based on my book, Africa-Centered Ancestral Healing. The purpose of this channel is to inform you of what Africa-Centered Ancestral Healing is and what it is not. It is also to promote the book. It is also to promote our annual conference, which is coming up March 15th through the 17th. And at the conference, we have workshops, we have speakers that go more in depth on different levels in different areas, but it's all along the lines of Africa-centered ancestral healing. It is the only conference of this type that does that. The purpose of this channel is to also provide you with information if you wanted to take ancestral healing classes and become a certified ancestral healing practitioner or community organizer. There's 2 programs. One is for academic and one is for the community. So that's the purpose of the channel, and I hope you will support us. If you do support us, hit subscribe, and I will continue to be in contact with you in some way. Some of the things we're going to address in this video is that what is Africa-centered, number 1. Number 2, what is ancestral healing? And first and foremost, how did I get here? And I would like to say that it was, because I don't believe in coincidences, it was by divine order and intervention. And in researching my family tree, my background is a clinical therapist, meaning what I learned was based on Eurocentric psychology, clinical, Freud, and all of that, CBT, and all of those areas. And I worked in Washington, D.C. I was a director at Hillcrest Children's Center and Federal City Recovery Services. I started doing ancestral healing workshops because I realized that those models were not actually working with the families. They can coexist. Clinical and traditional are most effective when they coexist. However, the way the system is designed, it's sort of unconsciously does not allow that because of the licensure process, which is why I am not licensed. I do not do clinical. I know it. I've studied it in depth. And what I learned, my first wake-up call was that Freud borrowed principles from what we know in the Black community, the Code of Ma'at, which is 42 living principles from Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, which is ancient Egypt. It was part of the mystery system and the schools that everyone all over the world went to study at. However, the challenge with it is if you're not open-minded or of a spiritual consciousness, you're not going to understand what the principles are. But Freud understood enough of the principles to borrow them and turn them into his psychodynamic theory, psychosexual disorders, and it was called the id, ego, superego, that everyone is familiar with. And let me translate that to you in Africa-centered ancestral healing as mental, physical, and spiritual, and in Christianity, mind, body, and soul, or the Trinity. It's always in a set of three, and I would recommend people study Tesla because he was the one that really explains about the numbers 3, 6, and 9. Every culture has borrowed from Africa's traditions. The doggone people were the first, and that's in my book in another chapter, to be able to study the stars and nature. Today, even our pharmaceutical companies make medicine from the herbs that they collect in Africa or the Amazon or South America. And so with all of that, and I know this is a part of a long intro, but it's just to give you an understanding of why it's Africa-centered and ancestral healing. I started ancestral healing, and my first book was published in 1998. They didn't understand that because the term then was forefathers. Now ancestral healing is everywhere. So my daughter recommended, you need to get a handle on it and get specific with the specialization. So Africa Center is not just for the African people, meaning all people throughout the diaspora. It's for all people who want to search their family tree because everything began in Africa. Doesn't matter your culture. Doesn't matter. It all started there. And in saying that, even the Catholic Church has vaults right now that they will not enter because of the artifacts and information, and their library is so secretive, borrowed from Africa. So Africa is the continent that gave birth to existence, not just people. It's the only continent that has never shifted its geographic location, that the equator runs through perfectly. It divides day from night, light from dark. All of the other 6 continents broke off from Africa during a climatic and sort of what we're having now, change. Because sound is the creative source of energy that shapes humanity. So that's how it became Africa-centered. And that ancestral healing is a matter of doing your family tree. And we cannot disregard the human atrocities. Let me back that up and say the man-made human atrocities. 3 major ones in this country, because I was born here in this lifetime. The slave trade, the Holocaust, and the Trail of Tears. You cannot deny the residual effects of trauma and emotional dysfunctions that came along with that. And I hear people say post-traumatic slavery. It's not post. None of that is post. None of it. How do we as human beings respect each other for who we are? It's not a get like me game. How can I respect what you do and you respect what I do without judgment? So now I'm going to move on to giving you an outline of what the chapters are. Chapter 1, it offers insight into the 3 phases of the seasoning process, which is the mental, physical, and spiritual. It talks about the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders. And then there's mental dysfunctions. There are 2 different things. A mental dysfunction is a result of a disorder. Okay. Chapter 2 introduces, as I mentioned earlier, the human man-made atrocities and how that plays into identity crisis and religion that has shaped how people think and how people are controlled by those processes. Chapter 3 reviews the DNA. That's one of the most significant chapters because it goes in depth into your DNA, into not only the mitochondrial DNA, but your regular DNA, to understand that your DNA speaks to the RNA. The RNA sits in your heart. That's your second brain, and it relays messages to the physical brain, and that's how actions are taken. The chapter 4 explores the genome in a divine way to understand, and I will say, okay, Dr. George Dunstan referred to the genome as God. And so the genome encompasses everything, the atoms, and it gets into the more scientific aspect of the DNA and how we operate and what traits we pick up and so forth. Chapter 5 offers an assessment of the family tree. There's 2 parts to the family tree. There is the family tree history, and there's the family tree medical. For instance, if you look at the patterns of your family tree and say they have a history of lying, let's just say that, or storytelling, well, they're probably going to have heart problems because every organ is connected to an emotion. So then if you go to the pedigree chart, where blood tests and all those things are done, the genetic outcome will probably be that that person the family has a history of heart problems. Liver, it would be resentment and anger. Cancer is a result of that. Chapter 6, Sankofa, it outlines the black psychologists who have already paved the way, beginning with Cecil Sumner. And Cecil Sumner did an assessment on Sigmund Freud, and he is the one who brought and introduced race psychology. And Bobby Wright was one of his mentees. And Bobby Wright began with a condition he described as menticide. And a lot of the early black psychologists understand they were coming out of the Reconstruction era. They were more, it was a combination of black nationalism and, the Black Power movement and all of that. And they realized that psychologists and psychiatrists didn't have black patients. Or if they did, they were experiments. And then that goes into eugenics and a whole nother thing. And then the last chapter focuses on bridging the gap between science and spirituality. That calls for root psychology as a discipline in higher education with a black psychology book curriculum. As it stands now, nowhere in the world is a black psychology discipline. A discipline is the category. The curriculum is what supports that category. You cannot get a degree in black psychology. Nowhere. You don't have it. You could take black psychology as an elective, or you can learn about it in African American studies. But in terms of the field of psychology, no. There's transformational, there's cognitive, there's behavioral, there's spiritual psychology, there's cultural, there's urban psychology, clinical. There's no black psychology. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because our time is coming to the end, but I did want to mention the sacrifice of human life. And I saw page 19, and the author of the book, Dr. Vincent Maurice Woodard, his book is called The Delectable Negro. And the sad part, and many people have bucked against me putting this in the book, but this is what I'm saying. It's a fact you have to look at. And what Dr. Woodard said was, many whites feared that, and this was after the Southampton insurrection or the Nat Turner insurrection, many whites feared that Turner would rise from the grave and rebone himself. This is how some have explained the gruesome cannibalization of Turner after his death. Okay. This is surely not the first time we've heard of cannibalism. But then further on, Frederick Douglass said, slavery is a living entity, already crimson with the blood of millions, and even now, the oppressor is feasting itself greedily upon our flesh. Well, we know that there are a lot of cultures that have practiced that, and then early on in our development as humans, it may have been necessary. I can't imagine it. But we live here. We got a grocery store, at least right now, you know. So, and these are the kind of things that I'm saying, is that some things are just beyond comprehension. You know, and then Dr. Elkins on page 21 in the book, he said, the seasoning process included the following steps whereby the African people became a slave. And he said, we may suppose that every African who became a slave underwent an experience that superseded anything that had ever previously happened to them. There goes another trauma-related incident. And so moving on page 22, then you see where Freud borrowed those specific principles. And then I go into the capitalistic side of it. Everybody was washing hands with money. It wasn't just white people. But that part is left out. I'm not condoning any of it. I'm saying let's be level-minded about it. Let's talk about it to a level that we can understand to a level that we can move on or move through it. So that is the other point of this channel, is to find some human empathy to understand and respect each other. That is my hope. And to really understand what Africa-centered ancestral healing is, what it brings to the table, and how it can work well with clinical psychology, or what you could say mental therapy and healing. That is why I said in the book about bridging the gap between science and spirituality. So that's going to wrap up for this segment. We have 7 parts that we will be doing before the conference. Again, is March 15th through 17th. Tickets are at Eventbrite, and our website number is www.IACTNOW 0119.com. Thank you for watching, and again, if you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button, and we will be in touch with you. Thank you. Have a wonderful, blessed day.